Tom Platz has been one of the few figures from bodybuilding's golden era to speak consistently and critically about the direction the sport has taken. While many of his contemporaries have largely stepped back from public commentary, Platz has continued to engage, and in 2024 he stated plainly what many inside the sport had been saying privately for years, that what appears on the Olympia stage today is not bodybuilding in any traditional sense. In his words, it has become a science experiment. To understand how significant that shift is, it helps to understand what the sport looked like before it happened. In the 1970s and 1980s, the dominant values in competitive bodybuilding were symmetry and proportion. A physique was judged not just by its size, but by how it was structured, the flow from shoulder to waist to quad, the visual harmony of the whole. Posing was treated as a serious discipline, something competitors spent significant time developing, not a formality between comparisons. Gold's Gym in Venice, California functioned during those years as a hub for serious competitors. Platz has described that period as vibrant rather than punishing. A community of athletes who trained together, debated technique, and returned the next day. The ambition was not simply mass. It was to build something exceptional that still retained the proportions of an idealized human form. Platz's own approach to training reflected that philosophy taken to an extreme. He built his method around mental discipline and high tolerance for physical discomfort, using visualization and what he described as embracing pain as a vehicle for growth. His well-known principle, 5 more reps, expressed the idea that the point at which the body signals failure is the point at which meaningful adaptation actually begins. He trained not to complete a session but to exceed what he had believed his limits to be. His programming combined high volume with high intensity, guided largely by instinct rather than fixed protocols. Rep ranges varied from 5 to 50. His leg training included back squats, hack squats, leg extensions, leg curls, and calf raises, with timed sets and continued partial repetitions after muscular failure, distinguishing his approach from the more standardized methods of his era. The result, his development, particularly in the legs, became one of the most referenced examples in the sport's history. The golden era was also, it should be noted, not free of performance-enhancing use. Platz has never suggested otherwise. But by his account, and by most historical assessments of that period, the compounds used were fewer, the doses more moderate, and the culture around their use was less central to competitive identity than what followed. Platz's criticism of modern bodybuilding is grounded in that contrast. He has spoken openly about a period when he experimented with heavier androgenic compounds to observe the effect on his physique. The result, by his own description, was significant weight gain that presented as bloated and thick rather than defined. He described the experience as looking like he was waddling onto the stage, and he discontinued it. That experience directly shaped his perspective on what performance-enhancing drugs do and do not do for the aesthetic standards bodybuilding was built around. In a recent interview, Platz called for a return to art over science in the sport. He stated, "I think we need less science, more art. Right now we have science experiments on stage in every category." That critique was not limited to the men's open division, though it is there that the consequences have been most visible. Platz extended his criticism explicitly to figure, bikini, and other categories. The use of performance-enhancing compounds has become so embedded in the competitive structure of professional bodybuilding that athletes rarely frame it as a choice. It functions in practice as a prerequisite. The most visually striking consequence of this shift is a condition known formally as Palumboism, named after bodybuilder Dave Palumbo, who competed with a pronounced abdominal distension. It describes a condition in which a competitor carrying single-digit body fat, with visible muscle definition throughout the arms, legs, and chest, still presents on stage with a midsection that protrudes outward in a way that appears structurally inconsistent with the rest of the physique. It is not a product of excess body fat or diet-related bloating. It is characterized by a distended abdomen alongside an otherwise shredded frame, a contradiction that has drawn increasing scrutiny from judges, fans, and observers outside the sport. The physiological explanation centers on long-term, high-dose use of human growth hormone and insulin. Sustained HGH use is associated with organomegaly, the enlargement of internal organs which causes the midsection to extend outward even when subcutaneous fat is minimal. Insulin, used by many high-level competitors to drive nutrient uptake into muscle tissue, also promotes fat storage in the abdominal region. The combined effect produces a physique that, to most observers, appears plainly abnormal. Pushback has grown both from within competitive circles and from the broader public, with social media accelerating the visibility of the debate and increasing pressure for the sport's governing bodies to respond. Pushing back on a trend when the incentive structure still rewards that trend is not reform. It is optics. For a long time, the biggest shows on the competitive calendar were placing athletes with distended midsections at the top of the podium. The message to the next generation was unambiguous. This is what winning looks like, and so they trained accordingly. People die in bodybuilding. The bodybuilding media and the organizations that govern the sport have shown a consistent tendency to look past what is happening to their athletes. In 2021, more than 24 professional competitive bodybuilders died suddenly, along with a number of retired bodybuilders under the age of 60. These deaths drew significant attention within the bodybuilding community, but relatively little from the wider medical establishment. These were not peripheral figures. They were working professionals who had built their careers around the sport. One men's physique competitor died days after his last competition, reportedly from cardiac arrest. Those who had guided his preparation offered no public comment. Shortly after, a Brazilian bodybuilder named Kevin Natário Nunes de Oliveira, aged 28, was hospitalized with severe leg pain. Doctors diagnosed necrotizing fasciitis, which rapidly destroyed surrounding tissue. His father indicated the infection stemmed from misuse of injectable steroids, likely stored improperly or sourced from black markets without quality control. Contaminated injections had introduced bacteria directly into his muscle tissue. In November 2024, retired bodybuilder Jose Mateus Correa Silva went into cardiac arrest while training at a gym in Águas Claras, Brazil. Friends brought the 28-year-old to a local fire station, where more than an hour of resuscitation attempts failed. His brother noted that Silva had no prior health conditions. The broader data behind these cases is significant. A study tracking 20,286 athletes who competed in 730 IFBB events between 2005 and 2020, with an average follow-up period of more than 8 years, recorded 121 deaths during the study window. 73 were classified as sudden deaths, including 46 sudden cardiac deaths. 11 of those were currently competing athletes, whose mean age was 34.7 years. Professional bodybuilders faced a considerably higher risk of sudden cardiac death compared to amateurs, with a hazard ratio of 5.23. The data indicated that competitive level itself contributes to elevated risk, with anabolic steroid use, extreme strength training, and aggressive weight loss strategies, including severe dietary restriction and dehydration, placing sustained strain on the cardiovascular system. The trend has not stabilized. By 2025, the numbers had worsened. Notable deaths that year included Verinder Singh Human, aged 41, widely referred to as India's Arnold Schwarzenegger, who died following cardiac arrest during treatment for a shoulder injury. Cadu Santos, 31, an 11-time bodybuilding champion from Australia, who died weeks after becoming engaged, and Jody Whites, aged 20, who died from complications attributed to severe dehydration. These are not isolated cases. They are the outcomes of a system that has not been structured around athlete safety as a functional priority. Tom Platz, someone who has spent decades operating within that system, understands this as well as anyone. Platz has stated that Mr. Olympia has lost its identity, and that Arnold Classic contests have lost their reputation. Those are pointed words from someone who competed at both events, who understands what they meant to athletes of his generation, and who remains invested in what they represent. To understand how those competitions reached this point, it helps to trace what happened after the golden era ended. The 1990s brought a new champion in Dorian Yates, who introduced a level of conditioning and muscle density the sport had not previously seen. Yates's physique was remarkable, but it marked a shift. Size and conditioning began to outweigh symmetry and proportion as the primary criteria for winning. Then came Ronnie Coleman, who pushed that standard further still. Coleman, competing at close to 300 pounds of muscle, drew significant attention, but it also established a benchmark that was nearly impossible to reach without extreme pharmaceutical intervention. That direction drew criticism from many figures in the sport, perhaps none more prominent than Arnold Schwarzenegger. In a widely circulated video, Arnold called for immediate change in how bodybuilding is judged, arguing that the central question should be straightforward. What body would I want to have? And unless we change the judging procedure and choose the guy with the most pleasing physique rather than just the thickest muscle, because look at the old days when Steve Reeves won. That statement carried weight. A 7-time Olympia champion and the figure most associated with the sport's classical ideal, was saying publicly that bodybuilding had gone in the wrong direction. Judging controversies over the years have been numerous and documented. Decisions at major competitions have repeatedly puzzled fans, analysts, and competitors. The expansion of pro cards issued globally has also diluted what professional status once signified. Cards that were formerly earned through world-level competition are now awarded at smaller national shows in various countries, making the designation less meaningful than it once was. The governing federation, the IFBB, has faced sustained criticism over its anti-doping posture. The World Anti-Doping Agency declared the IFBB non-compliant with anti-doping standards, a designation that reflects how the organization has responded to the systematic drug use occurring under its jurisdiction. The gap between what the rulebooks state and what takes place on competition stages each weekend is one that athletes, fans, and medical researchers have all observed. The issue that receives relatively little coverage in discussions of bodybuilding's problems is the financial reality facing its athletes. Tom Platz addressed this directly in a video that drew limited attention outside the bodybuilding community. Platz argued that bodybuilders are underpaid and called for a fundamental change in prize money. Drawing a direct comparison, the worst golfer on the Pro Tour makes about $500,000 a year. Failure at golf makes $500,000 a year. We can do better. bodybuilding can do better. The contrast is significant. A golfer who consistently misses cuts and ranks near the bottom of the tour earns $500,000 annually. The vast majority of competitive bodybuilders, men and women who have reorganized their lives, diet, sleep, social relationships, and long-term health around the sport, earn almost nothing from competing. Prize money at major shows represents a fraction of what athletes in other professional sports consider standard compensation. This creates a damaging dynamic. Athletes are incentivized to push further with drug use, training loads, and extreme cutting protocols, all in pursuit of a win that, even when it comes, does not provide financial stability. The primary income streams in the sport flow through supplement sponsorships, social media, and online coaching, all of which are tied to physical presentation. That means athletes face financial pressure to maintain extreme physiques, even when doing so is actively harmful to their health. Platz's reference to golf is instructive. The sport operates with prize funds in the hundreds of millions of dollars, substantial media rights agreements, and an athlete representation structure that allows even journeyman professionals to sustain their careers financially. Bodybuilding has not developed comparable infrastructure. Platz also called for broader professional development within the sport, arguing that young athletes should be trained not only in how to build their bodies, but in how to present themselves publicly, build personal brands, and generate sustainable income. He pointed to his work with Sergio Oliva Jr. as an example, encouraging the competitor to represent his father's legacy both inside and outside the gym. It is a vision of the sport that contrasts sharply with its current state. Whether the will exists to pursue it is a separate question. So the question after everything laid out here is whether bodybuilding is capable of saving itself. The pessimistic case is straightforward. The incentive structures are badly misaligned. Governing bodies have shown limited appetite for genuine reform. The athletes most at risk are often young, financially desperate, and surrounded by coaches and mentors who have built their own identities around extreme pharmaceutical use. Changing that culture is not a matter of issuing a press release or adjusting a judging rubric. It requires a fundamental rethinking of what the sport is for and who it serves. There are, however, signals that something is shifting. In recent years, greater emphasis has been placed on overall aesthetics, health, and balanced physiques rather than sheer size. That shift has influenced how bodybuilders train, what they prioritize, and how competitions are judged, indicating a movement back toward more traditional bodybuilding ideals. Some judges have begun factoring midsection control into their scoring in more meaningful ways. Competitors who maintain tighter, more proportionate physiques are being rewarded at shows that would have favored raw mass just a few years ago. The natural bodybuilding movement has grown substantially in both participation and viewership. Athletes who compete without performance-enhancing drugs and submit to testing to verify that have built genuine audiences, in some cases larger than those drawn to traditionally drug-assisted competitions. The audience for physical transformation and aesthetic achievement has not disappeared. It has shifted toward formats that do not require watching competitors risk their health to perform. Social media has changed the calculation in ways that cut both directions. It has given extreme physiques a platform that amplifies the sport's worst tendencies. It has also given critics, including Tom Platz, direct access to audiences that older media structures could not reach. When Platz posts a video describing what he sees on the Olympia stage as a science experiment, millions of people see it with enough context to understand precisely what he means. Platz's concerns about performance-enhancing drug use extend across every division, not just men's open but figure and bikini as well, where he has explicitly pointed to what he regards as excessive steroid use in categories that were historically considered closer to natural competition. That breadth of criticism is significant, because it forecloses the usual response that problems are confined to the open class while other categories remain unaffected. Platz is arguing that the problem has spread through the sport as a whole. His vision for what the sport could look like is not utopian. He is not calling for zero pharmaceutical involvement. His understanding of the sport's history is too clear for that. What he is calling for is a return to proportion, to craft, to the idea that a bodybuilder's physique should be something that inspires the people who see it, not something that unsettles them. He wants posing taken seriously again. He wants symmetry to outrank mass. He wants athletes compensated in ways that reduce the financial desperation driving so many of them toward the extremes they pursue. And he wants the sport to be honest about the cost of what it currently demands from its competitors. Treating the deaths as coincidences, the health collapses as individual failures, and the financial exploitation of athletes as sustainable is not a defensible position. Tom Platz, more than almost anyone still speaking publicly within the sport, has consistently refused to let that go unaddressed. Tom Platz never won the Mr. Olympia. That's part of what makes his position unusual. He competed against the best of his era, trained as hard as almost any of them. The evidence is in his physique and his reputation, and left without the title many believed he deserved. He could have spent the years since in bitterness, or stepped back entirely, or built a comfortable career around nostalgia while leaving harder conversations to others. He has done none of those things. He continues to speak publicly, and to say plainly what he sees in front of him. The sport he first encountered at 9 years old, drawn in by a photograph, by the idea that a human being could build something extraordinary through sheer effort, is facing serious problems, not the kind that get resolved by a press conference, a rule adjustment, or an Olympia winner with a marginally tighter midsection than the year before. The problems are structural. A growing number of premature deaths among competitors, a financial system that rewards physical recklessness, a judging culture that has lost its aesthetic reference points, and a generation of young athletes being asked to compromise their long-term health for a sport that offers most of them no reliable income in return. Platz is raising a question that anyone following the sport ought to take seriously. What is bodybuilding trying to be? If the answer is a competition defined primarily by pharmaceutical capacity, staged under bright lights, then the sport's direction is already clear. If it's meant to be something else, a demonstration of what human beings can achieve through discipline, sustained effort, and physical development, then the current state of professional competition represents a significant departure from that standard. What appears on the Olympia stage today is not what Platz trained for, and it's not what the competitors of his era were working toward in the gyms of Venice, California. That gap is visible, and it has been visible for some time. The remaining question is whether those with the institutional authority to change the sport's direction will choose to use it.